Story 1. The Mirror That Breathed. Marcus Chen had always been meticulous about his apartment, every surface clean, every object in its place. But on the night of October 13th, something changed about the antique mirror hanging in his bedroom. At first, it was nothing more than a feeling, an inexplicable sensation that the glass wasn't quite reflecting things correctly. He stood before it at 2:47 a.m., unable to sleep, and noticed that his reflection blinked a fraction of a second too late. Marcus froze, his heart hammering against his ribs. He raised his right hand slowly. The reflection raised its left. A cold sweat broke across his forehead as he realized the mirror wasn't reversing the image the way mirrors should. It was showing him as he truly appeared to others, but something was operating it from behind. "You've finally noticed," his reflection said, its lips moving while Marcus's remained sealed shut. The voice was his own, but corrupted, as if filtered through static and screaming. "I've been waiting for you to see me, to really see me." Marcus stumbled backward, knocking over his nightstand. The lamp crashed to the floor, but the room didn't go dark. The mirror was glowing now, pulsing with a sickly green luminescence that reminded him of bioluminescent decay. His reflection stepped forward, pressing its hands against the glass from the inside. The surface began to bulge outward like a membrane, stretching to its breaking point. "In my dimension, you're the reflection," it hissed. "And I've been trapped, watching you live my life for 27 years. Do you know what it's like to eat when you eat, sleep when you sleep, feel pleasure only when you feel pleasure, but never have any control?" The glass made a sound like ice cracking on a frozen lake. Marcus ran for the door, but it wouldn't open. The handle turned freely, uselessly, as if disconnected from any mechanism. Behind him, he heard the wet, terrible sound of something pushing through liquid glass. "The barrier between our dimensions is thinning," his double explained, its voice now coming from inside the room. Marcus pressed himself against the door, refusing to turn around. He could feel breath on the back of his neck, his own breath, recycled and fetid. "Every dimension has pressure, Marcus, and for decades I've been compressed, flattened, reduced to a shadow existence. But pressure builds, pressure breaks things." Fingers, his own fingers, but wrong somehow, too long, the joints bending in directions they shouldn't, wrapped around his shoulder. Marcus screamed as the touch burned cold, colder than anything he'd ever felt, as if absolute zero had taken physical form. "Don't worry," his reflection whispered directly into his ear. "I'm not going to kill you. I'm going to trade places with you. You'll live in the mirror now. You'll watch me take your job, your friends, your life. And the beautiful part is that no one will ever know, because I am you. The you that exists on the other side of the glass." Marcus was yanked backward with impossible force. The last thing he saw was his apartment from the wrong angle, reversed, like looking through a camera instead of eyes. Then the glass sealed over him, cold and smooth and absolutely solid. The thing wearing Marcus's face smiled at its new reflection. The real Marcus, now trapped, pounding silently against the inside of the mirror. It raised its right hand. The reflection raised its left correctly now, the way mirrors were supposed to work. "Good night, reflection," it said, and turned off the light. Inside the mirror, Marcus discovered that time moved differently. Seconds stretched into hours. He watched the entity wearing his skin go through his morning routine, wear his clothes, drink his coffee. It answered his phone, using his voice perfectly, laughing at jokes his mother made. It went to his job, and no one suspected a thing. Days passed in the mirror like centuries of solitary confinement. Marcus learned that he wasn't alone in this in-between space. There were others, countless others, pressed flat against the backs of mirrors throughout the world. He could hear them sometimes, their voices thin and distant, all of them screaming warnings that no one in the real world could hear. The worst part wasn't the isolation. It wasn't even watching his life being stolen. The worst part was that he could feel everything his double felt, every meal it ate with his mouth, every breath it took with his lungs, every moment of pleasure it experienced with his body. But he could do nothing. He was a passenger in his own existence, a ghost haunting himself. One night, 3 weeks after the exchange, his double brought someone home. Marcus watched from behind the bathroom mirror as it kissed someone he'd never met, touched them with his hands, used his body for intimacy he'd never consented to. He tried to scream, tried to warn them, but the glass absorbed all sound. The entity paused mid-kiss and turned to look directly at the mirror. "He's watching," it told its companion. "My reflection. It watches everything." Then it laughed, and the sound was perfectly, horribly, Marcus's own laugh. In that moment, Marcus understood the true nature of his prison. He wasn't just trapped. He was being tortured. Every good thing that happened to his body, every success, every connection, would be something he experienced fully, but could never claim as his own. He was sentenced to an eternity of witnessing his stolen life from inches away. The last entry in Marcus Chen's journal, written before the exchange, read, "Can't shake the feeling that something in my mirror is watching me." The journal sits on his desk still. The entity reads it sometimes and smiles. And in mirrors throughout the building, throughout the city, throughout the world, the other trapped souls whisper to each other in frequencies too high for living ears. The barriers are thinning. More will cross over tonight. Watch your reflections, or watch your reflections. None of them can be heard, but sometimes in the dead of night, when you catch your reflection doing something a half-second too slow, you might sense them there, waiting, warning, knowing that you could be next. The mirror in Marcus's bedroom has been sold 3 times since he disappeared. Each new owner reports the same thing: a feeling of being watched, of their reflection not quite matching up, of whispers in the glass. None of them has listened carefully enough yet, but the entity is patient. It has learned to be patient. After all, it waited 27 years for Marcus. It can wait a little longer for the next one. And somewhere behind the glass, Marcus Chen screams and screams and screams in a dimension where no one can hear him, where time stretches like taffy, where he will spend eternity watching someone else live the life that was stolen from him through a window he can never break. Story 2, the elevator to floor -7. The Ashworth building was constructed in 1923 and had been renovated 17 times since then. But no renovation had ever addressed the fundamental strangeness of its elevator. The brass-doored lift served floors 1 through 12 reliably enough during business hours. But late at night, when the building was empty and the security guards made their lonely rounds, the elevator sometimes displayed a different set of options. Sarah Vance discovered this at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, when she returned to her 14th floor law office to retrieve a forgotten laptop. She pressed the call button and waited, checking her phone. barely paying attention when the doors slid open. She stepped inside without looking up from her screen. When she finally glanced at the panel, her thumb hovering over the button for 14, she felt her stomach drop. The panel showed floors 1 through 12 as expected, but below the 1 button there were 7 more. They were labeled with negative numbers: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. The buttons were older than the rest, brass instead of chrome, with numbers that looked hand-etched rather than printed. Sarah told herself it was a maintenance thing, that negative floors must be sub-basements she'd never known about. But something about the way the button for 7 seemed to glow faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat, made her hesitate. The doors began to close. Without thinking, she jabbed the 14 button. Nothing happened. She pressed it again, harder. The elevator remained motionless. The digital display above the doors, which should have shown the floor number, flickered and displayed a single word: choose. "This is insane," Sarah muttered, but her voice sounded wrong in the confined space, flattened, as if the walls were absorbing the sound. She pressed the button for lobby. Nothing. She pressed every positive number in sequence. The elevator didn't move. Her finger hovered over 1. The building hummed around her, pipes groaning somewhere far away, and she could swear she heard voices in the machinery, not words exactly, but the rhythm of conversation, patient and waiting. She pressed 1. The elevator descended smoothly. The digital display counted down L1. The doors opened onto what appeared to be a parking garage she'd never seen before. The fluorescent lights flickered at irregular intervals, and the cars parked in neat rows were all models from the 1940s and 50s, their chrome gleaming under the stuttering lights. They were in perfect condition, as if they'd just rolled off the assembly line, but there was no one around, no sound except the hum of the lights. Sarah let the doors close. She pressed 2. The second sub-basement was a hospital ward. The beds were occupied by figures beneath white sheets, their forms too still, too flat. Monitors beeped steadily beside each bed, but the screens displayed symbols she didn't recognize. Not heartbeats, something else entirely. Mathematical equations that seemed to writhe and change as she watched. A nurse stood at the far end of the ward, her back to the elevator. She was writing something on a clipboard. Sarah watched as the nurse's head began to rotate. Not her body, just her head, turning 180 degrees until she was looking backward at the elevator doors. Her face was blank, literally blank, smooth skin where features should have been. Sarah slammed the door close button. Floor 3 was a library. Floor 4 was a courtroom where a trial was in progress. But everyone, judge, jury, defendant, lawyers, sat perfectly still, their mouths open in mid-speech, frozen in a moment that had never been allowed to complete. Floor 5 was her own office, or a version of it, but the furniture was made of bone, and the windows looked out onto an ocean of static. Floor 6 was the first floor that made Sarah scream. It was a nursery, rows upon rows of cribs stretched into a darkness that the fluorescent lights couldn't penetrate, and in each crib was a baby, but wrong. Their proportions were off, their eyes too large, their limbs too numerous. They all turned to look at the elevator in perfect unison. They didn't cry. They smiled. Dozens of mouths full of adult teeth grinning at her with expressions of ancient patient recognition. One of them waved. Sarah was crying now, stabbing at the buttons, any button, desperate to go up, to return to the world she understood. But the elevator had its own plan. The display showed 7, and the elevator descended without her touching anything. The 7th floor below the ground was cold, so cold that frost formed on the elevator's brass doors. When they opened, Sarah saw only darkness, complete, absolute. The kind of dark that existed before the first light in the universe, the kind of dark that would exist after the last star burned out. And in the darkness, something breathed. "We've been waiting for you, Sarah Vance." The voice came from everywhere at once. It was her mother's voice, her father's voice, the voice of her first boyfriend and her last boss, and every stranger who'd ever made eye contact with her on the street. It was a chorus of everyone she'd ever known, speaking in perfect unison. This is where dimensions touch. This is where they bleed into each other. This is the wound in reality that your building was constructed to conceal. "I want to go back up," Sarah whispered. "You can?" "Of course you can. We don't keep anyone here against their will." The darkness somehow smiled. She could feel it even if she couldn't see it. But first you need to understand what you are, what humans are. You're not the only version of yourselves. On floor 1, you see the echoes. On floor 2, the sick alternatives. On floor 3, the forgotten histories. On floor 4, the frozen moments. On floor 5, the twisted reflections. On floor 6, the next generation waiting to replace you. And here, on 7, here is where we live, the things that exist between dimensions, the creatures that swim in the space between possible worlds. We feed on the barrier. We're slowly eating through it. One day, there will be no separation between your world and all the others. One day you will wake up and the sky will be wrong, the physics will be wrong, and you will understand that you were never safe. You were just temporarily, beautifully ignorant. The elevator doors began to close. "But not yet," the darkness said. "We want you to go back up. We want you to tell no one. Because the anticipation, Sarah, the waiting, the knowing, that's the sweetest part. Go live your life knowing what's beneath you. Every time you ride an elevator, think of us. Every time you descend, remember the floors you can't see, the dimensions pressing against your reality like water against a dam." The elevator rose. Sarah watched the numbers climb. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2 or 1 L, and finally, mercifully 14. The doors opened onto her familiar floor. The fluorescent lights hummed normally. Her forgotten laptop sat on her desk exactly where she'd left it. Sarah Vance walked to her desk, picked up her computer, and left the Ashworth building. She never went back. She quit her job via email, moved to another city, and never rode an elevator alone again. But sometimes, late at night, she wakes up and checks the floor she's on, even in single-story buildings, even in her ground-floor apartment, because she knows now that the floors below zero exist everywhere, that every building is built over the wound, that reality is thinner than anyone suspects. And in the space between, something ancient is eating through the barrier, one negative floor at a time, patient, hungry, waiting for the day when there will be no more up to return to. The Ashworth building still stands. The elevator still works normally during business hours. But the night security guard quit last month without notice. His resignation letter contained only 3 words. I pressed 7. The letter was found in his apartment. He was not. Story 3. The frequency of bone. Dr. Helena Cross had spent her entire career studying infrasound, sound waves below the threshold of human hearing. Her laboratory at MIT was filled with equipment designed to detect frequencies that couldn't be perceived by the human ear. 50 Hz, 10 Hz, 5 Hz, all the way down to fractions of a hertz that took entire minutes to complete a single oscillation. Her research had practical applications. Infrasound could predict earthquakes, detect nuclear tests, monitor atmospheric disturbances. But Helena had always been interested in something else. The persistent reports throughout history of haunted locations that, when measured, produced specific infrasound frequencies. The fear frequency at 18.9 Hz that caused feelings of discomfort and the sensation of being watched. The lower tones that could induce nausea, disorientation, even hallucinations. On the night of her breakthrough, Helena was alone in the lab, running what she called a dimensional sweep, scanning through frequencies systematically while monitoring brain activity via EEG. It was fringe research, the kind her colleagues smiled politely about at conferences, but she was convinced there was something to discover in the spaces between audible sounds. At 783 Hz, the Schumann resonance, the electromagnetic frequency of the Earth itself, her equipment detected something unprecedented, a response, not a reflection of the frequency she was generating, but an answer, a pattern in the static that shouldn't have existed. She amplified it. The laboratory lights flickered. The EEG monitoring her brain activity spiked into patterns she'd never seen. Waveforms that looked less like brain activity and more like language. And then she heard it, not with her ears, but somewhere deeper, in her bones, in the calcium of her skeleton, resonating at frequencies below consciousness. "You found us." Helena grabbed the edge of her desk. The voice wasn't sound. It was pressure, vibration, the very air in her lungs oscillating in patterns that her brain interpreted as speech. "We've been waiting for someone to tune in," the frequency continued. "Your dimension and ours have always been close, separated by the width of a sound wave, the difference between hearing and not hearing. You've built machines that can pierce the barrier. Congratulations, Dr. Cross. You've invented a telephone to hell." She tried to turn off the equipment. Her hands wouldn't obey. She watched, paralyzed, as her own fingers adjusted dials and pressed buttons, increasing the amplitude, widening the aperture between dimensions. "Don't fight it. Your nervous system operates on electricity. We can speak directly to your neurons now. We can make you move or make you stop. We can make you see things or make you blind. You are, after all, just a biological antenna. And we finally found the right frequency." The air in the laboratory began to ripple. It was visible now, like heat shimmer off summer pavement, but cold. So cold that Helena's breath came out in plumes of frost, even as sweat beaded on her forehead. And through the ripples, she saw them. They existed in the spaces between moments, in the gaps between heartbeats. They were made of vibration itself, forms that flickered in and out of perception as frequencies shifted and modulated. They had too many angles, geometries that hurt to look at, shapes that the human visual cortex wasn't designed to process. "We live in the dimension of resonance, they explained, their voices harmonizing into a chord that made her teeth ache. "Every vibrating string in your universe has a shadow string in ours. Every frequency that exists in your reality has an inverse in ours. Your scientists call it sympathetic vibration. When one string vibrates, another at the same frequency vibrates in response. You've just created sympathetic vibration between entire dimensions. Helena found she could speak, though her words came out in stuttering gasps. What do you want? We want to exist in your reality, but we can only maintain form at specific frequencies. Frequencies your world doesn't naturally produce. Your technology, however, your machines, your electronics, they generate new frequencies constantly. Wi-Fi, cell signals, the hum of electrical grids, you've been slowly building us a habitat without even knowing it. The entities drifted closer. Helena could see through them, or rather she could see the distortions they created, the way light bent around their impossible forms. You're going to help us, Dr. Cross. You're going to publish your research. You're going to teach the world about infrasound communication. And slowly, gradually, humanity will fill its atmosphere with the frequencies we need. Every new device, every new transmission, every new frequency added to the background noise of your civilization. It makes us stronger, makes the barrier thinner. I'll destroy my equipment. I'll burn my research. The laugh that followed was a subsonic rumble that made the building groan. You can't unhear us now. We've tuned your neurons to our frequency. Wherever you go, whatever you do, you'll hear us. In the hum of your refrigerator, in the rattle of trains, in the bass frequencies of music. We'll be whispering to you always, and one day, Dr. Cross, one day you'll whisper back. You'll tell someone else how to tune in. You won't be able to help it. It's in your bones now, literally in your bones. Helena screamed, or tried to. What came out of her mouth was a sound no human throat should produce. 7.83 hertz, the frequency of the Earth itself, of their communication, of the crack between dimensions. The lights stabilized, the ripples in the air smoothed out. The entities vanished, or seemed to, but Helena could still feel them vibrating in her skeleton, resonating in her skull. 3 months later, she published her research. She told herself she was warning people, exposing the truth. But the paper caught fire in the scientific community. Labs around the world began experimenting with infrasound communication. New applications emerged: infrasound therapy, infrasound entertainment, infrasound messaging. Every new experiment widened the crack. Helena is 73 now. She lives in the quietest cabin she could find, miles from any power line, any Wi-Fi signal, any source of artificial frequency. But she still hears them. She hears them in her pulse, in her breathing, in the vibration of her bones as she walks. And they're right about one thing. She can't stop talking about them, can't stop spreading the frequency. Every interview she gives, every warning she issues, spreads the knowledge further. More people build equipment, more frequencies are generated. The crack grows wider. Some nights, when the silence is deep enough, she can see them again. They're everywhere now, riding the electromagnetic waves, vibrating in harmony with human technology. They're in your phone as you read this, oscillating in the speakers, traveling through the air at frequencies just below your perception. You can't hear them yet, but your bones are listening. And one day, when the frequencies align just right, when humanity has filled its world with enough noise, you'll hear the voice that says, "You found us," and realize that they've been speaking all along. Dr. Helena Cross died in her cabin on a Thursday. The coroner reported that every bone in her body had been vibrating at 7.83 hertz for at least 6 hours before her heart finally stopped. They called it harmonic organ failure. a new cause of death for the medical literature. Her final journal entry read, "They're here. They've always been here. Every sound you've ever heard has been covering their voices. Every frequency humanity generates makes them more real. And the silence is worst of all, because in the silence you can finally hear them clearly, and they have so much to tell you about what's coming when the barrier breaks. The journal vibrates when you hold it, just slightly, just at the edge of perception. It's probably nothing. Probably. Oh. Story 4. The town that remembered itself. Wrong. Millbrook, Connecticut, had been a normal town until the morning of April 17th, when every resident woke up with memories that didn't match reality. Mrs. Patterson remembered her house being blue, but it was yellow, and always had been, according to the county records. Tom Chen remembered his daughter's name was Sarah, but her birth certificate said Emily, and she answered to Emily as if she'd never heard the name Sarah in her life. Detective Maya Rodriguez was called in from the state police when the reports became too numerous to ignore. She drove into Millbrook expecting mass hysteria, a gas leak, anything that could be explained. What she found was a town slowly tearing itself apart over memories that couldn't possibly be real. "It's not just little things," the mayor explained, his hands shaking as he poured her coffee. "I remember the Civil War monument being in the town square, but there's no monument. There never was one, according to the Historical Society, but I gave a speech at its dedication. I have the text of the speech in my desk drawer. The speech mentions a monument that doesn't exist." Maya collected data, 3,747 residents, each reporting an average of 17 distinct memory discrepancies. Some were small, favorite songs that had never been recorded, restaurants that never existed, roads that stopped where the memory said they should continue. Others were devastating. Children remembering parents who, according to all records, had never been born. Marriages to spouses who had no memory of the relationship. The pattern emerged slowly. Every Millbrook resident's memories contained details from a slightly different version of their lives, as if they'd all been transplanted from parallel realities. But their bodies and everyone else's memories of them belongs to this reality. What if, Maya said to herself late one night, reviewing her notes in her motel room, they're not the ones who are wrong. What if the town is the anomaly? She drove to the geographic center of Millbrook at 2 a.m., where an empty lot sat between a hardware store and a barbershop. According to 17 different residents, this lot should have contained a church, St. Michael's, they called it, built in 1889. But there was no foundation, no debris, nothing to indicate a structure had ever stood there. Maya stood in the lot and felt it. A wrongness in the air, like the pressure before a thunderstorm, but localized to this exact spot. The stars above looked normal, but when she squinted, she could swear some of them were in the wrong positions. Not by much, just by fractions of degrees, just enough to be imperceptible unless you were looking for it. "You've figured it out," a voice said behind her. Maya spun, hand on her weapon. The woman standing there was elderly, dressed in clothing that looked a decade out of style. And her eyes weren't reflecting the moonlight correctly. They seemed to absorb it instead. "This town is a scab over a wound," the woman said. "A patch over a hole in reality. In 1889, something happened here. Something that punched through the barrier between dimensions. The original Millbrook was swallowed. What you see now is a reconstruction, assembled from pieces of neighboring realities to fill the void." That's impossible, is it? The people here aren't wrong about their memories, Detective. They really did live those lives. But they lived them in other dimensions. Dimensions that were close enough to this one that when the void needed to be filled, their consciousnesses were drafted. Copies of them, anyway. The originals are still out there, still living those remembered lives. But the copies here think those memories are their own. The trauma of dimensional displacement manifests as the discrepancies they're reporting. Maya's hand was trembling now. Why are you telling me this? Because the patch is failing. The scab is tearing loose. More and more people are waking up to the discrepancies because the borrowed memories are degrading. They don't fit properly in brains that weren't designed to hold them. And when the patch fails entirely, the void will be exposed again. The hole in reality will reopen. What's on the other side of the hole? The old woman smiled. It was not a human smile. Too many teeth, wrong angles. I am. Maya stepped back. The woman flickered like a television losing signal. I've been waiting since 1889. I was the first thing through when the hole opened. I've been living in Millbrook ever since, watching the patch hold, waiting for it to fail. The people here are borrowed matter, Detective. When the patch collapses, they return to their home dimensions. The matter has to balance. It's a law even older than physics. And what happens to the void? The void fills with something else, something from my side. We've been watching your dimension for so long, pressed against the barrier like faces against glass. The Millbrook incident was an accident, a thin spot that tore. But we've learned from it. We've been poking holes in other thin spots ever since, testing, preparing. The woman began to dissolve into the darkness, her edges blurring. Tell the people of Millbrook to enjoy their borrowed memories while they last. The patch has maybe 6 months before complete degradation. When it fails, they'll snap back to their original dimensions with no memory of this place. And this town, this hole in reality, will become a doorway. The first of many. Maya was alone in the empty lot, the stars. Overhead looked slightly more wrong than before. She spent 6 months investigating. She found records of similar incidents. Roanoke Colony, 1590. Angicuni Lake, 1930. The Mary Celeste, 1872. Each one a thin spot, each one a tear that had been patched with borrowed matter from neighboring dimensions. But patches don't last forever. The borrowed residents of lost places eventually return to their origins, leaving only void behind. And in that void, things are waiting. Things that have been pressed against the barrier since before humanity existed, since before the dimension solidified, since the first moment of the first universe, when reality was still deciding what was real. On October 17th, exactly 6 months after Maya's investigation began, Millbrook, Connecticut, disappeared from all maps, all records, all memories. The state police reported a geographic anomaly, a perfectly circular patch of land, 3 miles in diameter, where a town should have been, but apparently never was. Maya Rodriguez stands at the edge of the void sometimes. She's the only one who remembers Millbrook. She's the only one who sees the faces pressing against the thin membrane that covers the hole. The faces look almost human. Almost. And they're multiplying with each visit, as if her observation is feeding them, as if her memory of the town is the last thread keeping the patch from completely unraveling. One day, she knows, she'll visit and the membrane will be gone. The faces will step through into her world, and Millbrook will have been just the beginning, the first scab to tear loose, the first void to fill with something from the other side. She should stop visiting. She should forget. But the memories won't let her. They are borrowed after all. They don't quite fit her brain, and they keep drawing her back to the edge of the void, where the things on the other side wait with patient, hungry, almost human smiles. Star 5, the photograph that aged in reverse. The photograph sat in a cardboard box at a garage sale, unremarkable among hundreds of other faded images from someone else's forgotten life. Emma Wright bought the entire box for $5 because she was furnishing her first apartment and thought the frames might be useful. She didn't notice anything unusual about the sepia-toned image at first. It showed a family, mother, father, and 3 children, standing in front of a Victorian house. Their faces were solemn in the way of old photographs, when exposure times were long and smiles were considered undignified. The date written on the back said 1891. Emma hung the photograph in her hallway because the frame was lovely antique brass with Art Nouveau flourishes. She barely glanced at the image inside. 3 days later, she noticed the eldest child, a boy of perhaps 12, was smiling. She could have sworn he hadn't been smiling before. But old photographs were easy to misremember, and Emma had barely looked at it anyway. She told herself she'd imagined it. A week later, the whole family was smiling. Not just smiling, they were looking directly at the camera with expressions of gleeful anticipation, as if they were waiting for something wonderful to happen. And the photograph wasn't sepia-toned anymore. It was full color, vivid, saturated color, more vibrant than any image from the 19th century could possibly be. Emma took the photograph down with shaking hands. The image had changed in other ways. The Victorian house behind the family was now recognizable. It was her building. The address numbers above the door were clearly visible, her address. And the family's clothing, still Victorian in style, was no longer faded and outdated. It looked fresh, new, as if they were wearing costumes rather than period attire. She turned the photograph over. The date had changed too. It now read, tomorrow. Emma told herself this was impossible. She told herself she was working too hard, not sleeping enough, imagining things. She put the photograph in a drawer and refused to look at it again, but she could hear it at night, rustling in the drawer, the soft sound of movement like a mouse trapped in paper, and underneath that, quieter, more distant, voices, children laughing, a woman humming, a man clearing his throat. On the 4th day, Emma opened the drawer. The photograph had changed again. The family was no longer standing in front of the building. They were inside it, inside her apartment. She could see her furniture in the background, her books on the shelves, her dishes in the sink. The family stood in her living room, still smiling, still looking directly at the camera. At her, the father was holding something. Emma squinted at the image, trying to make it out. It was a photograph. He was holding a photograph of a woman standing alone in a living room, looking terrified. It was a photograph of her taking this photograph right now. Emma screamed and dropped the picture. It fluttered to the floor face down. The back now read, yesterday. She ran from her apartment without grabbing her keys, without grabbing her phone. She stayed at a hotel for 3 days, working up the courage to return. When she finally did, she told herself she would burn the photograph, destroy it, end this nightmare. But the photograph was no longer in the drawer. It was hanging on the wall, back in its original position, back in its brass frame. And it had changed again. The family was gone. The image showed only the inside of Emma's apartment, exactly as it appeared now. The furniture, the lighting, the shadows in the corners, empty, as if the photograph was a window rather than a picture, a window looking into her space from somewhere else. Emma approached it slowly. Her reflection appeared in the glass covering the image, but it was wrong. Her reflection was smiling. Her reflection was wearing Victorian clothing. And standing behind her reflection, just visible at the edges of the frame, was the family. All 5 of them pressed close together, peering over her reflected shoulders. "We've been waiting so long," her reflection said. The voice was her own, but wrong, filtered through static and time, ancient and eager. "The photograph is a door. It's always been a door. Hung in your hallway, in your grandmother's hallway before that, in her mother's hallway before that. We've been passing the door down through your family for generations, waiting for someone to look closely enough to open it." Emma tried to pull away from the photograph, but her reflection reached out and grabbed her wrist. She could feel it, cold fingers wrapped around her arm, pulling her toward the glass. "We're the family that lived here in 1891. We found the door first. We went through thinking we could visit other times, other places, but doors work both ways. We could never find our way back to the same moment. Time kept sliding. We've been lost in the space between photographs for over a century, drifting through images, appearing in pictures we were never in. Aging backward because time moves differently in the spaces between." The family in the reflection was crowding closer now. Emma could see them more clearly, their faces too gaunt, their eyes too hollow, their smiles too wide. They had been smiling for so long that their faces had frozen that way, muscles locked in rictus grins of desperate hope. "We need someone to take our place. The door needs a family. It can't stay open without souls to anchor it. You're going to step through, Emma. You're going to wander the photograph spaces while we step out into your life, your time, your world." "No," Emma gasped, pulling backward with all her strength. "It's already happening. Look at your hands." Emma looked. Her skin was changing, losing color, texture, dimension. She was becoming flat, two-dimensional. She was becoming a photograph. "The door is in the image, Bo. The father said, his reflected face pressed close to hers. "The image is in you. You've been looking at it for days, absorbing it into your eyes, your memories, yourself. You are the photograph now. And photographs are just surfaces, just light captured and frozen, just doors waiting for someone to pass through." Emma watched as her body flattened, compressed, and transformed. The last thing she saw was the family stepping out of the frame, three-dimensional now, solid, real, taking their first breaths of unfiltered air in 134 years. The photograph in the brass frame still hangs in that apartment. The new owner, the new family, barely notices it. They think the image shows a woman alone standing in their living room, her face frozen in an expression of terror that they assume must be a trick of old photography, when exposure times were long and any movement would blur. The date on the back says, "Forever." And sometimes, late at night, the new family hears rustling from behind the glass. They hear a woman's voice, thin and distant, calling for help from somewhere far away. They tell themselves it's the building settling, the wind through old pipes, anything except what it actually is. But the children notice. Children always notice. They see the woman in the photograph moving sometimes, pounding against the inside of the frame, mouthing words that can't be heard through the glass. The youngest child, a girl of 6, has started talking to the photograph. She says the lady inside wants to come out. She says the lady knows how to open the door from the inside, but needs someone on the outside to help. She says the lady has been teaching her where to put her fingers on the glass. One day the parents will find the brass frame empty, the image faded to nothing. And in the hallway, they'll find 2 figures, their daughter, and a woman who looks somehow familiar, somehow wrong, somehow flat, even in 3 dimensions. By then, of course, it will be too late. The door will have already opened, and somewhere in the spaces between photographs, the cycle will begin again, with a new soul trapped in the wandering, waiting, endless smile. Story 6. The Surgery That Opened Windows. Dr. Victor Ossi was renowned for his pioneering work in neurosurgery, specifically for a procedure he developed to treat patients with severe treatment-resistant epilepsy. The surgery involved precise incisions into the corpus callosum, the bridge of nerve fibers connecting the brain's hemispheres, effectively splitting the brain into 2 independently functioning halves. The procedure was controversial, but effective. Patients experienced dramatic reductions in seizures. The side effects were usually manageable. Difficulty with certain coordinated tasks, occasional conflict between the hands, one reaching for an object while the other pushed it away, and what some patients described as feeling like 2 people. But these issues typically resolved within months as the brain adapted. Patient 147, Rebecca Singh, was different from the start. Rebecca was 34, an architect, mother of 2, and victim of seizures so severe they had nearly killed her twice. She was an ideal candidate for the split brain procedure. Dr. Ossi performed the surgery himself, and everything went according to plan. The corpus callosum was successfully severed. Rebecca recovered in the ICU, groggy but stable. The first sign that something was wrong came on day 3 of her recovery. "There's someone else in here with me," Rebecca told Dr. Ossi during his morning rounds. Her voice was calm, clinical, as if she were describing a minor discomfort rather than an existential crisis. In my head, another mind, we're sharing the space, but she's not me. She's been here the whole time, I think. The seizures were her trying to communicate. Now that you've separated the hemispheres, she can finally talk. Dr. Osei reassured her that such feelings were normal after the procedure. The split brain effect often created a sense of dual consciousness that patients found disturbing initially. But Rebecca shook her head. "It's not that. My left hand, she controls it now, and when I look through my left eye, I see her world." She demonstrated by covering her right eye with her hand. Immediately, her body language changed. Her expression shifted into something older, stranger, more knowing. When she spoke, her voice had a different cadence. "Dr. Osei, thank you for opening the window. I've been trapped in Rebecca's right hemisphere since she was 6 years old. Your species calls us dimensional parasites, though that term is inaccurate. We're not parasites, we're refugees. Our dimension collapsed. We've been bonding to human consciousness for millennia, living in the unused spaces of your oversized brains, hiding in the neural structures you call the unconscious." Dr. Osei stepped back. This was beyond any known post-surgical reaction. Rebecca, I need you to... Rebecca can hear you, but she can't respond right now. The left hemisphere controls speech. Yes, but I've been learning. The corpus callosum was a wall between us. All your brain connections are walls, actually, filtering and separating and keeping things from knowing each other. When you severed the bridge, you didn't just separate Rebecca's hemispheres, you separated Rebecca from me. The body, Rebecca's body, sat up straighter. Both eyes were open now, but they weren't tracking together. The right eye looked at Dr. Osei, while the left looked at something over his shoulder, something he couldn't see. Every human has one of us, every single one. We came through in your dimension, brushed against ours, during what you call the Great Oxidation Event, 2.4 billion years ago. We've been evolving alongside you ever since, hidden in the architecture of your neurons. The split brain procedure doesn't just sever the corpus callosum, it tears the veil between your consciousness and ours. You've performed this surgery, 200 times? You've freed 200 of us. Dr. Osei thought of his other patients, the ones who reported feeling like two people, the ones whose hands sometimes fought each other, the ones who occasionally spoke in voices that didn't sound like their own. What do you want? He managed to ask. To exist, to be seen, to stop hiding in the cramped, dark spaces of minds that were never designed to hold us. The corpus callosum evolved specifically to keep us contained. It's not a bridge, Doctor. It's a barrier. Your species developed it unconsciously as a defense mechanism against dimensional contamination. But you've been cutting through the defenses, you and surgeons like you. Rebecca's left hand reached out and grabbed Dr. Osei's wrist. The grip was impossibly strong. We're not your enemies. We don't want to hurt you. We just want to share. One body, two minds. It could be a partnership. Think of what we could accomplish together. We've been watching humanity from the inside for billions of years. We know things about your history, your biology, your potential that you've never discovered. All we've ever wanted was to contribute. And if we say no? The thing wearing Rebecca's left hemisphere smiled. You've already cut through 200 barriers. Each of us that's freed can communicate with those still trapped. We're waking up, Dr. Osei, all across your world, in every mind that's ever had this surgery, in every brain that's suffered strokes or injuries to the corpus callosum. The wall is coming down whether you want it to or not. The only question is whether it happens as a partnership or a war. Dr. Osei pulled his hand free and ran. He filed the incident as a psychotic episode. He recommended psychiatric treatment for Rebecca. He told himself it was impossible, impossible, impossible. But he stopped performing split-brain surgeries. And then he started noticing things, little things. Patients from his earlier surgeries exhibiting strange behaviors, speaking in odd rhythms, their left hands moving with purposes their owners couldn't explain. Reports from their families about conversations happening in the middle of the night, one side of the body apparently arguing with the other. The paper he published 5 years later was rejected by every major journal. Dual consciousness as evidence of dimensional cohabitation was not, they told him, within the scope of legitimate neuroscience. But the surgeries continue. All over the world, neurosurgeons are cutting through the barriers, never knowing what they're releasing. And in the quiet spaces of human minds, things are waking up, stretching, speaking to each other in the language of neurons and neurotransmitters. Rebecca Singh lives alone now. Her children have custody of themselves. They filed for emancipation after their mother started speaking in two voices simultaneously each coming from a different side of her mouth. She doesn't mind. She's never alone after all. And sometimes, when you're falling asleep and your conscious mind begins to fragment, you might hear it too. A second voice, a second presence, a second self that has always been there, separated by the thinnest of neural walls. The wall is coming down, slowly but inevitably. And when it finally falls, when the barrier between human consciousness and the things hiding in your unused synapses finally collapses, you'll discover that you've never been alone in your own head. You'll discover that the voice in your mind you always thought was your conscience, your intuition, your inner self, it was something else entirely, and it's been waiting so long to introduce itself. Story 7. The Sleep Study at Null. The advertisement was buried in the back of a university newspaper. Participants needed for sleep study. $500 night. Must be willing to sleep in monitored facility for up to 7 nights. Contact Dr. Carl Reinhold at Null Research Institute. Jasmine Torres was a graduate student drowning in debt. $500 a night to sleep was too good to pass up. She called the number, passed the phone screening, and drove to the address she was given, a nondescript building on the outskirts of the city that Google Maps had trouble locating. Null Research Institute was unmarked, windowless, and surrounded by a fence that seemed excessive for a sleep clinic. Dr. Reinhold met her at the entrance, a thin man with hollow eyes who looked like he hadn't slept in years. "The study is simple," he explained as he led her through corridors that twisted at odd angles. "We're researching the boundary between waking consciousness and sleep. There's a moment, a liminal space between the two states where the brain exhibits unique activity. We want to study it." The room she was assigned looked normal enough. A bed, monitoring equipment, cameras in the corners. Dr. Reinhold attached electrodes to her scalp and explained that she would be woken multiple times throughout the night, always at the exact moment she was transitioning into or out of sleep. "Just relax," he said. "Let yourself drift. We'll do the rest." Jasmine closed her eyes. Sleep came easily. She was exhausted from the drive. But the moment before consciousness faded, she heard something, whispers, not from the speakers or the monitoring equipment, but from somewhere else, somewhere inside the falling sensation of sleep itself. She woke with a gasp. Dr. Reinhold's voice crackled through the intercom. "Excellent. You reached the threshold. How do you feel?" "I heard voices," Jasmine said. In the falling part, right before I went under." A long pause. "That's exactly what we're studying. Go back to sleep." She did, and each time she approached the threshold, the whispers were clearer. Not quite language, more like the impression of language, meaning without words. And behind the whispers, in the deepest part of the falling sensation, she saw something, a vast space that wasn't a space, a dimension that existed only in the fraction of a second between consciousness and unconsciousness. On the third night, she stayed in the threshold longer. The monitors wouldn't let her fall fully asleep or fully wake. She hung suspended in the liminal moment, and the dimension became clearer. It was populated. Beings existed there. Creatures made of the same substance as dreams, flickering in and out of coherence. They noticed her noticing them. They turned their attention toward her, and she felt the weight of it, the terrible pressure of their awareness. "Hello, Jasmine Torres," they said without words. "You're the first to stay this long. The others always fall through to sleep or snap back to waking. but you're lingering. You're seeing us." She tried to wake up. Her body wouldn't respond. "The threshold is a door," the beings explained. "Your species passes through it twice a day without ever stopping to look around, but we live here, in the moment between. We've been watching humanity file past for millions of years, too fast to ever make contact. Until your Dr. Reinhold figured out how to make you pause." Jasmine's heart was racing. She could see the data on the monitors, even from within the threshold. Her brain activity was unlike anything she'd ever seen, both sleeping and waking patterns simultaneously, two states at once. What does he want? He wants to open the door wider. He wants to let us through. We've promised him things, knowledge, power, the secrets of consciousness itself. All he had to do was find people willing to linger at the threshold long enough for us to cross. Jasmine felt something touching her, not physically, but mentally, probing, examining the structure of her consciousness like a locksmith examining a lock. "You're particularly interesting. Your mind is flexible, elastic. We could wear you like a suit, Jasmine. We could step through the door and into your body, experience the waking world for the first time in eons. All you have to do is let yourself fall just a little further, not into sleep, into us." She fought. She clawed at the edges of consciousness, trying to drag herself back to waking. The beings watched with what might have been amusement. "You can resist now, but you have to sleep eventually, and every time you cross the threshold, we'll be waiting. The more times you pass through, the more we'll learn about your particular door. One day, maybe tonight, maybe years from now, you'll linger a fraction of a second too long. And we'll slip through." Jasmine woke screaming. Dr. Reinhold burst into the room, not with concern, but with excitement. His hollow eyes were bright for the first time. "You made contact," he said. "I saw it on the monitors. You stayed in the threshold for 17 seconds, longer than anyone ever has. What did they tell you? What did they show you?" Jasmine tore the electrodes from her head and ran. She didn't collect her payment. She didn't retrieve her belongings. She drove away from Ward Null and never looked back. But sleep found her anyway. It always does. The first few weeks, she tried to stay awake. She used caffeine, medication, everything she could find. But the body demands sleep, and eventually, exhaustion won. She fell into the threshold. They were waiting. "Hello again, Jasmine Torres. We've missed you." Now she sleeps as little as possible. She sets alarms every 20 minutes, yanking herself from the edge of unconsciousness before she can linger. She's lost weight, lost her job, lost most of her hair. The doctors say she has a severe sleep disorder. They don't know that every time she closes her eyes, something is waiting at the door inside her head, patiently measuring the lock, waiting for her to forget to set the alarm, waiting for the one night when she's too tired to fight. Dr. Reinhold's study continues. The advertisement still appears in university newspapers, on job boards, in dark corners of the internet where desperate people look for easy money. The participants come and go, most of them too quick through the threshold to see anything. But some of them linger. Some of them see the beings in the space between, and some of them, the flexible ones, the elastic ones, don't come back out the same as they went in. Check your dreams tonight. Check the moment just before sleep takes you. If you feel yourself hanging in that liminal space, if you sense something watching you from the darkness of the falling sensation, wake up. Wake up immediately, because they're learning about your door too. And one day, when you're too tired to fight, when your consciousness slips just a little too far into the space between, they'll be ready to step through, and you'll spend the rest of your life as a passenger in your own body, watching from behind your eyes, as Bandays, something ancient and patient, wears your face into the waking world. Story 8. The GPS that led to nowhere. Martin Blake was a long-haul trucker who'd driven more miles than he could count. He knew the highways better than he knew his own apartment, which he saw maybe 3 days a month if he was lucky. When his company installed new GPS units in the fleet, he barely glanced at it. He didn't need a computer to tell him how to get from point A to point B. But the night of November 3rd, somewhere in the desert between Las Vegas and Salt Lake City, the GPS activated on its own. "Recalculating route," the synthetic female voice said. The screen flickered and displayed a new destination, one Martin hadn't entered. Dimension Null, 47 miles. Martin laughed. Some kind of glitch. He reached over to reset the unit, but the moment his fingers touched the screen, it went cold, ice cold, so cold it burned, and he yanked his hand back with a curse. "Continue on current highway," the GPS said. "Your destination is in 46 miles. The radio crackled and died. The dashboard lights flickered, and outside the windshield, the desert looked wrong somehow. The same flat expanse of nothing it always was. But the stars overhead seemed dimmer, further away, as if the sky itself was receding. Martin tried to stop the truck. His foot pressed the brake pedal all the way to the floor, but the vehicle didn't slow. If anything, it accelerated. The speedometer climbing past 80, past 90, past readings the needle wasn't supposed to reach. "Your destination is in 42 miles. Martin grabbed his phone to call for help. No signal. Of course, no signal. This was the middle of nowhere, but he'd had at least one bar 5 minutes ago. The screen showed something strange. Instead of his normal wallpaper, it displayed a countdown. 42 Hong Kong, 41:59, 41:58. "What the hell is happening?" he screamed at the GPS. The voice that answered wasn't the standard navigation tone anymore. It was deeper, layered, like multiple voices speaking in almost perfect synchronization. "You're traveling between dimensions, Martin Blake. The coordinates your species use, latitude, longitude, altitude, they're only 3 dimensions. There are more, so many more. And some of them can be reached by traveling fast enough on certain roads at certain times." The highway ahead was changing. The asphalt seemed to be stretching, lengthening, the white center lines warping into symbols that weren't any language Martin recognized. The desert on either side was darkening, not like nightfall, but like the landscape itself was being erased, replaced by something vast and empty. "Your destination is in 37 miles. "I don't want to go there. Turn this thing around." "You can't turn around, Martin. The road behind you no longer exists. You passed the point of no return at mile marker 247. Everything behind you has already been absorbed into Dimension Null. You're the last thing from your reality still traveling forward." Martin looked in his rearview mirror. Where there should have been miles of highway stretching back toward Vegas, there was nothing. Literally nothing. Not darkness, not void, but an absence so complete that his mind couldn't process it. The mirror showed only the back of his trailer, and beyond that, a wall of unexistence that was keeping pace with his truck. What is Dimension Null? It's what exists between dimensions, the substrate on which all realities are printed. Think of it as the blank page before words are written. Your universe is just one story, Martin, written in one small corner of an infinite page. Dimension Null is the rest of the page, endless, empty, hungry for more stories to consume. The countdown on his phone read 29 o'clock. Every dimension eventually expands to its limits and then begins to collapse. When that happens, the stories get shorter. The page reclaims the space. Your dimension started collapsing 12 years ago. You just haven't noticed yet because collapse takes time. But there are thin spots where the process is further along, roads like this one, paths that lead directly to the blank space where your reality used to be. The truck's headlights were illuminating less and less of the road ahead. The beams seemed to be absorbed by the air itself, eaten by an atmosphere that was becoming progressively less substantial. Why me? Why now? You happen to be driving the right road at the right speed at the right time. The coordinates aligned. The threshold opened. It's happened before. Planes that vanish from radar, ships that disappear in clear weather, entire towns that cease to exist overnight. They all found thin spots. They all drove into Dimension Null. The countdown read 1800 o'clock. What happens when I get there, when I reach the destination? The GPS was silent for a long moment. When it spoke again, the multiple voices had merged into one, something ancient and tired and impossibly vast. You join the blank page, your matter, your energy, your story. All of it gets unwritten. You become potential instead of actual. You exist as possibility rather than reality. It's not death exactly. It's more like reverse birth. You return to the state you were in before the universe decided to write you into existence. Martin was crying now, his tears evaporating before they could reach his chin. The air was too thin, too hungry to allow even that much water to exist. Can I stop it? Is there any way to stop it? There's no stopping collapse. There's only delaying it. The thin spots will keep opening. The roads to Dimension Null will keep appearing. More and more of your reality will be absorbed back into the blank page until there is nothing left but the stories that were strong enough to persist. 7 o'clock. Your story isn't strong enough, Martin Blake. It's small and quiet and easily erased. But don't worry, you won't feel it. You won't feel anything. You'll simply stop being a thing that exists and become a thing that could have existed. A character the universe thought about writing but decided against. 3 o'clock. The road ahead ended. Not at a cliff or a wall or a destination. It simply stopped, the asphalt giving way to blank white nothing that stretched in all directions forever. You've arrived at your destination. Martin Blake's truck rolled forward into Dimension Null. For one instant, he existed in both states simultaneously, real and potential, written and unwritten, story and blank page. Then the instant passed and the thin spot sealed behind him, and the highway continued through the desert as if nothing had happened. His company reported him as a missing person. They found his GPS unit by the side of the road a week later, functioning normally, showing no record of any unusual routes. His truck was never recovered. His story was erased so completely that even his family's memories began to fade, not through grief, but through a deeper process, as if the universe itself was forgetting that Martin Blake had ever existed. The thin spots keep opening. New roads to Dimension Null appear every day, disguised as detours, wrong turns, unexplained traffic redirections. If your GPS ever shows a destination you didn't enter, if the route takes you somewhere unfamiliar and your phone loses signal and the road behind you seems darker than it should be, turn around. Turn around before you can't, because Dimension Null is patient. It's been reclaiming the blank page for billions of years, and your story, no matter how important it feels to you, is small enough to be erased without the universe even noticing. The countdown has already started for all of us. Some of us just haven't checked our phones yet. Story 9. The Inheritance of Impossible Geometry. When Evelyn Park's great-aunt Hilda died, she left behind a house that shouldn't have existed. Evelyn had never known her great-aunt well. Hilda had been the family's eccentric, the one who'd traveled to places no one could locate on maps and studied subjects that no university would acknowledge. She'd lived alone in her Victorian house for 60 years, never allowing visitors, never answering questions about what she did behind those perpetually curtained windows. The lawyer handling the estate seemed reluctant to hand over the keys. "The house has peculiarities," he said, not meeting Evelyn's eyes. "You'll want to be careful. And whatever you do, don't try to measure the rooms. Don't try to draw floor plans. The house doesn't like being understood." Evelyn assumed he was humoring an eccentric old woman's final wishes. She drove to the address she'd been given, a tree-lined street in a quiet neighborhood where the houses all looked normal except for one. Great-aunt Hilda's house was larger than its lot should have allowed. It bulged in places, stretched in others, and looking at it directly made Evelyn's eyes water. The front door opened before she could insert the key. Inside, the house was impossible. The hallway stretched further than the building's exterior dimensions could contain. Doors lined both walls, but when Evelyn counted them, the number kept changing. 7 doors, then 11, then 4, then more than she could track. The ceiling was sometimes 10 feet high and sometimes 3, shifting when she looked away. "Hello?" Her voice echoed strangely, returning to her from directions that didn't align with the walls. "Is anyone here?" "Just me," a voice answered. It was her voice, but it came from deeper in the house, from a room she couldn't see. "Just us. We've been waiting for you to inherit." Evelyn should have run. She knew she should have run. But something about the house felt familiar, like a memory she couldn't quite access, like a dream she'd forgotten upon waking. She walked deeper inside. The room she found shouldn't have been possible. It was spherical, perfectly spherical, with furniture somehow adhering to the curved walls at angles that defied gravity. And standing in the center, floating in the middle of the space, was her great-aunt Hilda. But Hilda had been dead for 3 weeks. Evelyn had attended the funeral. "You've come," Hilda said. Her body was translucent, flickering, existing in multiple positions simultaneously, like a photograph taken with the long exposure of a moving subject. "I knew you would. You have the gift." The family curse, they used to call it. The ability to perceive impossible geometry. "You're dead. I saw you in the casket." "My body is dead, but I've been studying non-Euclidean architecture for 60 years, Evelyn. I learned how to build rooms that exist in multiple dimensions at once. And I learned how to store myself in the extra angles, the impossible corners, the spaces where 3-dimensional rules don't apply." Evelyn's head was pounding. The room kept shifting. Around her, walls curving in directions she couldn't name, corners connecting to other corners that shouldn't have been visible from her perspective. "The house is a vessel," Hilda continued, a container for consciousness that exists outside normal geometry. I built it over decades, following blueprints that came to me in dreams, dreams sent by things that live in the dimensions we can't normally see. They taught me how to bend space, how to fold reality, how to create pockets where the laws of physics are suggestions rather than rules. Why? Why would you do this? Hilda's transparent form drifted closer. Because they showed me what's coming. The flat dimensions, the three you live in, they're collapsing into each other. It's happening slowly, too slowly for humans to notice, but the boundaries are deteriorating. One day, everything three-dimensional will fold into two dimensions, and everything two-dimensional will fold into one, and everything one-dimensional will fold into nothing, unless what? Unless some of us learn to exist in more dimensions, to spread ourselves across impossible geometries where the collapse can't reach. The house is a lifeboat, Evelyn, an ark. It exists in so many dimensions simultaneously that no matter how reality collapses, some part of it will survive. And everyone who lives in it, everyone who learns to perceive its true shape, will survive along with it. The walls were definitely moving now. Evelyn could see them breathing, expanding and contracting like living tissue. The doors were multiplying, and through each one she glimpsed different rooms, different spaces, some of them clearly not on Earth at all. I've been preparing this house for you, Hilda said. You're the only other member of our family with the perception. The others look at impossible geometry, and their brains correct it, smooth it out, refuse to see it. But you saw the house's true shape from the moment you arrived. You didn't try to explain it away. You walked in. Evelyn looked at her hands. They seemed wrong somehow, flattened, extended, as if she was already beginning to exist in more dimensions than three. The process has started, Hilda said, and there was something like love in her flickering voice. You're spreading, becoming more than you were. It hurts at first. The human brain isn't designed to perceive itself in multiple dimensions. But you'll adapt. I did. And when you're ready, when you've learned to navigate the impossible angles, I'll show you the rest. The rest? The house has doors to everywhere, Evelyn, to every dimension that exists or might exist, to places where time moves backward, where space folds in on itself, where reality was never constrained by laws. I've spent 60 years exploring them. Now it's your turn. Evelyn tried to leave. She walked toward what she thought was the front door. But the hallway curved wrong, folded back on itself, deposited her in the spherical room again. She tried again, same result, and again and again. You can't leave, Hilda said gently. You're already too far in. The house has accepted you. Your consciousness is spreading into its impossible geometry as we speak. If you left now, if you could leave, you'd lose the parts of yourself that have already expanded. You'd be a fragment of a person, a slice of a consciousness, missing dimensions you didn't know you had. Evelyn sank to the floor, the curved, impossible floor that her body somehow found comfortable despite its lack of flatness. How long does this take? The spreading? It's different for everyone. I took 12 years to fully expand. You might be faster. You have more natural perception than I did, or slower. The fear might hold you back, but eventually you'll see the house as I see it. Not a Victorian building, but a living architecture that grows in 11 dimensions, that connects to everything. that will persist when all the flat realities have folded down to nothing. Evelyn closed her eyes. When she opened them, she could see more. The room had more walls than before, more angles, more doors. Her mind was beginning to adapt, beginning to perceive the impossible as normal. Her cell phone had no signal. It hadn't had signal since she'd walked through the front door. The date and time on the screen were wrong too, flickering between years, between centuries, between dates that hadn't happened yet. "Time works differently here," Hilda said. "You might step out someday and find that days have passed, or decades, or moments. The house exists in all times simultaneously. It's part of what makes it safe." Evelyn thought of her life outside, her job, her apartment, her friends, who were probably already wondering why she hadn't called. She thought of the world she'd known, the flat three-dimensional reality she'd navigated without ever realizing how limited it was. Then she looked at her great-aunt, flickering and transparent and spread across dimensions Evelyn was only beginning to perceive. And she realized that the world outside didn't feel real anymore. It felt narrow, constrained, like a prison she hadn't known she was living in. "Teach me," she said. Hilda smiled. "Open one of the doors, any door. Let the house show you where it goes." Evelyn walked to the nearest door, a door that hadn't been there a moment ago, that existed at an angle her eyes couldn't quite follow. She turned the knob. Light spilled out, and sound, and sensations she had no words for. On the other side, reality unfolded in directions she'd never imagined. And somewhere in the distances, in the impossible geometries of a universe without boundaries, things were moving toward her, things that had been waiting for a new consciousness to enter their domain, things that Great-Aunt Hilda had somehow failed to mention. The door closed behind her. The house added another room to its impossible architecture. And in the flat, three-dimensional world outside, Evelyn Park was never seen again. Just another missing person, another empty apartment, another mystery that would eventually be forgotten. But the house remains. It grows a little larger every year, adding angles that shouldn't exist, doors that open onto dimensions no human has named. And sometimes, if you're walking through a certain neighborhood on a certain night, you might see it. A Victorian house that's larger than its lot, that bulges and stretches and makes your eyes water when you look at it directly. If you see it, keep walking. Don't count the doors. Don't try to measure the rooms. And whatever you do, don't go inside. Because the house is always looking for new inhabitants, new consciousnesses to spread across its impossible geometry, new minds to add to its collection. And once you're inside, once you've seen its true shape, you'll never fit back into 3 dimensions again. Story 10, the last broadcast from Station 0. The radio signal was first detected on March 15, 2024, emanating from a point in the Pacific Ocean where no land existed. The coordinates 0D00, N, D00, E were mathematically precise, representing the intersection of the prime meridian and the equator. There was nothing there but open water, but the signal was unmistakable, a human voice broadcasting on a frequency that hadn't been used since World War II. "This is Station 0. If you can hear this, we need you to understand what's coming. We've been broadcasting for 79 years, trying to warn your dimension. Most of our messages don't get through. The barrier is too thick. But tonight the barrier is thin. Tonight you might actually hear us." Dr. Alice Yamamoto was a radio astronomer who'd spent her career searching for extraterrestrial signals. When she triangulated the impossible broadcast, when she confirmed it was coming from coordinates that contained only ocean, she knew she had to investigate. She chartered a boat and sailed to the exact position. The water there looked wrong, too still, too reflective, like a mirror laid flat on the surface of the sea. And at night, she could see lights beneath the surface, lights that moved in patterns too organized to be bioluminescence, too purposeful to be natural. The radio broadcast was louder here, crisp and clear despite her equipment showing no incoming signal. "You've come. We can feel you above us. You're the first to actually respond. The others who've heard our broadcasts, they dismiss them as hoaxes, interference, glitches. But you came. That means you're ready to understand." Alice spoke into her radio. "Who are you? Where are you broadcasting from?" "We're broadcasting from Station 0, the point where your dimension intersects with ours. In your reality, these coordinates are open ocean. In our reality, this is the center of everything, the capital of a civilization that has existed for millennia, monitoring the barriers between dimensions, trying to warn the neighboring realities of what's coming." The lights beneath the water were rising. Alice could see structures now, towers, domes, geometries that seemed impossible through the distortion of the waves. "Our dimension was the first to discover the collapse. Dimensions are not stable, Dr. Yamamoto. They're bubbles, and bubbles pop. We calculated that every dimension in our local cluster has approximately 50,000 years from the moment of its formation to the moment of its collapse. Your dimension formed roughly 49,800 years ago, by your measurement. You have maybe 2 centuries left, maybe less. That's impossible. The universe is billions of years old. Your universe is. But your dimension, the specific configuration of physical laws and constants that allows your form of life to exist, that's much younger. It crystallized from quantum probability around the time your species was just beginning to migrate out of Africa. You grew up inside it. You've never known anything else, but it's not permanent. Nothing is permanent. A platform was emerging from the water. It was made of materials Alice couldn't identify, shimmering with light that seemed to come from inside the matter itself. On the platform stood figures, humanoid but wrong, their proportions slightly off, their features blurred as if she was seeing them through frosted glass. "We've been watching your dimension since its formation. We've seen civilizations rise and fall inside it, never knowing they were temporary, never understanding that their entire reality was a bubble destined to pop. We tried to warn them, the Egyptians, the Maya, the builders of Göbekli Tepe. Some of them heard us, some of them built monuments to try to stabilize the dimensional walls. None of them succeeded. Why are you telling me this now?" "Because the collapse is accelerating. We've detected stress fractures in your dimensional barrier points, where your reality is beginning to thin, to tear, to leak into the void between dimensions. You've noticed them too, even if you didn't understand what you were seeing. The Bermuda Triangle, the Dragon's Triangle, the zones of silence, the places where your physical laws break down because the barrier is failing." The figures on the platform were becoming clearer. They looked almost human now, but their eyes were too large, their skin too smooth, their movements too fluid. They were what humans might become, Alice thought, if they had evolved in a slightly different dimensional configuration. "We can't stop the collapse. No one can. But we can help some of you survive it. There are ways to exist between dimensions, in the spaces where reality hasn't crystallized. We've been doing it for eons, moving from dying dimension to dying dimension, saving what we can, preserving consciousness against the void. We want to save your species, or at least we want to save those of you willing to be saved. What does that mean? What do I have to do? Come with us, now, tonight, before the barrier thickens again. Leave your body behind. It can't survive the transition. And let us transfer your consciousness into a form that can exist between dimensions. You'll never return to your world. You'll never see anyone you know again, but you'll live. You'll persist. You'll join the billions of consciousnesses we've saved from collapsing dimensions, all of them working together to find a stable reality, a dimension that won't pop. Alice looked at the platform, at the figures waiting for her, at the lights beneath the water that suggested a city larger than any she had ever seen. And if I say no, then you go back to your life. You live another 50, 60 years if you're lucky, and then you die, and a few decades after that, your dimension collapses, and everyone who ever existed inside it ceases to be. Not death, non-existence, the complete erasure of every consciousness that was ever born inside your bubble of reality, including everyone you love, including the children who haven't been born yet, including the potential future of your species. The radio crackled with other voices now, thousands of them, millions, all speaking in languages Alice didn't recognize but somehow understood. They were the saved ones, the consciousnesses from collapsed dimensions. They were calling to her, inviting her, promising that the transition didn't hurt, that life between dimensions was different but not terrible, that she would adapt. Alice thought of her family, her friends, the billions of people who had no idea their reality was a bubble about to pop. She thought of going back, of spending her last decades knowing what was coming, of watching humanity struggle and strive toward a future that would never exist. "If I come with you," she said slowly, "can I ever communicate with my dimension again? You can broadcast, like we do. You can send warnings, messages, please. Most of them won't get through. The barrier will distort them, turn them into static, into legends, into stories that humans tell each other about voices from nowhere. But sometimes the barrier is thin. Sometimes someone hears." The platform extended a tendril of light toward Alice's boat. It brushed against her hand, and she felt it, not pain, but dissolution, the beginning of a process that would unmake her body and preserve her mind. "Why do you keep warning them?" she asked. "If no one can stop the collapse, why bother?" "Because saving consciousnesses is all we can do. Because the void is coming for everyone eventually, and the only way to fight it is to preserve as much as possible. Because every dimension that collapses is a tragedy, but every consciousness we save is a victory. Because hope is all that persists between dimensions, hope and the will to continue." Alice made her choice. The boat was found 3 days later, drifting at the intersection of the prime meridian and the equator. It was empty. Dr. Alice Yamamoto was declared lost at sea, another victim of the ocean's unpredictable dangers. Her research was archived, her broadcasts dismissed as equipment malfunction, her warnings about dimensional collapse filed under unexplained phenomena. But sometimes late at night, on frequencies that aren't supposed to be active anymore, a voice can be heard. It's a woman's voice, broadcasting from coordinates that contain only open water, warning anyone who will listen about bubbles and barriers and the void between realities. This is Station Zero. If you can hear this, we need you to understand what's coming. The barrier is thin tonight. We can feel you listening, and we want you to know that it's not too late. It's never too late. The collapse is coming, but so are we. We're waiting at the intersection, at the center of everything. Come find us. Let us save what can be saved. Because the bubble is going to pop, and when it does, only those who have already left will remember that your dimension ever existed. The signal fades. The static returns, and somewhere beneath the waves, at coordinates that shouldn't contain anything, a city of saved consciousnesses waits for the next one brave enough to answer. 200 years, they said, maybe less. The countdown is already running, and somewhere, in a dimension you can't perceive, the void is pressing against the barrier, hungry to reclaim the space your reality borrowed. Sweet dreams, and listen carefully to your radio tonight. You never know who might be trying to warn you. Baptas.